Yes.
No, they'll have a roster. We are resuming the meeting.
I don't think we are.
Here, I got something.
We're resuming the meeting. Go to your Thank you for allowing us that short recess. We now proceed with the next item, if the clerk would read.
D is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trapp declaring the necessity to repair, alter, reconstruct, enlarge, or improve the city's water pollution, and/or stormwater utility system through improvement projects authorized by resolution and providing notice of intention, authorizing the issuance of revenue bonds in the manner required by KSA 10-1201S.
City Manager.
Mayor, this item relates to the continuation, really addressing the utility projects that are part of the CIP.
Thank you very much. So this pretty much is just allowing us to go forward with the funding. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I just ask, we reduced 2 projects. I know the one at the zoo, I'm not certain that was a utility project, but I know the generators was.
Yes, and I just was checking. I'm sorry. Yes, Councilwoman Emerson, we had, I just asked Deputy Manager regarding that project. Since it's an out-year project, it's not listed in this. So it's not included in this list already. So since it's an out-year project, it's not included in this list.
Thank you.
Okay, additional comments or questions with regards to this item? We have a motion to approve. We have a second by Deputy Mayor. Additional comments? All those in favor? Please vote. Oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Mr. Ledbetter. No, we have not voted. We have not voted.
Otherwise, it'd be moved, right?
Pardon me.
I think I will go ahead and skip the public comment later, though. I have a concern about the rising debt level of the bonds, the revenue bonds. I was looking at I'm looking on my phone here, at a chart I was given earlier by city staff, and it looks like we're going from $200 million in revenue bonds in 19, which would be next year, to $350 in 2023. And as one of the council people said earlier, that's quite a dramatic rise over the next 4 years, well, 5. I'm not sure that's sustainable. I don't know if we really need to keep, in fact, I know we don't. We don't need to keep increasing our water and sewer rates on our citizens and our businesses just to justify the spending of bonds. I would say that surely you could come up with some projects that are cash. I mean, we did just increase utility rates by almost 20% over the next 2 years. In fact, people are already now impacted by that. And I would say if you keep increasing these rates, there are businesses that use a lot of water, and you may be affecting our economic development down the road if we don't start looking forward about some of these things. Revenue bonds are quite a bit more expensive than GO bonds, and although I believe in them, I believe in using them. We had that in our master's training at KU. You use them for things to increase productivity. You don't just use them as often as you would a GO bond. And one of the reasons for that is because they're so costly. And so we're not just paying interest. You know, I keep hearing about the interest we're paying. We're paying bond commissions. We're paying sales commissions. So when we had bond counsel come in, going, people make a lot of money selling these bonds and telling you all to buy bonds all the time. I think, I would like a healthier skeptical attitude about revenue bonds, similar to what we've been doing with GO bonds. And, I just think that we need to really maybe slow down, have a little more caution about this stuff. I do not want to continue to pay water rates and sewer rates into the stratosphere. And you're setting yourselves up if you keep doing these projects and, you just cut some earlier. You found they were unnecessary. I would say put a lot more scrutiny to these projects. Now, one thing I would like to see, and I don't have a good explanation why it wasn't done, is I did see one of the pie charts that was sent out where we bonded to do 5 years worth of pipe replacement, water line replacement, and it was at $1 million a year. So for 15 years, 5 years times 3, we had 15 million. And then the bonded cost of that was 19 million. And I'm going, didn't we just increase these rates? Why can't you pay cash for that? And then why are we only doing 3 a year? Why aren't we analyzing that and maybe doing more of that, since that's always one of the sales pitches they give us, is we've got to replace all these pipes, so we got to increase your rates. Well, then why are you not replacing more than 3 a year? Because that's what you've been doing historically. So I find a little bit of a mixed message there that deserves real explanation. Why aren't you doing more of this water line replacement since you just increased the rates to that extent? That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, Ms. Robertson.
Just wanted to remind you all that this will take a 2/3 vote to pass this particular resolution.
Okay. We are back to the CIP revenue bonds for the Enterprise Fund project. We were about to do our vote, so we now would proceed with the vote unless there's additional comments. Yes, sir.
I do have, where we have our threshold, is it appropriate under this area? Is this where we have our $125,000 threshold, or is that just the
Councilman Lister,
GO?
that applies across the board, both to utilities and to general fund type projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions from the body? Okay, seeing none, we proceed with the voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move into non-action items, if the clerk would read.
A is discussion relating to traffic and pedestrian safety and camping on public property or private property without written consent of the owner.
City Manager.
Mayor, tonight we're having a discussion item, non-action item really, to review what we're proposing as changes to our code that will address both a pedestrian safety issue and also camping on public property or private property without the written consent of the owner. In order to have that discussion, we have our city attorney, Luther Giovanni. He's our police legal advisor, and he'll present information relative to these ordinance changes. Luther?
Excuse me, Ms. Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had a discussion with some of the firefighters and the union, and this is a very important issue to them. And they were going to have an MDA speaker come down, but he couldn't come tonight. But if he can come next week. I really hate to do this, but if we can defer this for a week so that he can come and give testimony and talk about it, I would like to do that. If not, if we're not going to defer it, if we could allow him to speak next week, I just think it would be very appropriate that we hear from him. Absolutely. Because it is a major part of what they do. I've had discussions with them. We talked about parking lots, and and what this will do to them if we change this. So I will make a motion to defer for 1 week.
We have a motion and we have a second to push the discussion item. This is just a discussion item tonight. But yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
Well, I don't see any reason to push off the discussion myself. Because we're here, we are prepared, unless people just want to go home. I mean, it allows us to be prepared and discuss and learn about the issue, and then that person, we've had some communication from the fire, or from the MDA anyway already. So it seems like we should go ahead and have this discussion item now, and then people can decide whether they're ready to vote.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I would agree. I would love to have the discussion with you all, at least in some capacity, so I can then reach out to my constituents based on that discussion before we meet with everybody next week and either make a decision or I would see deferment would be more appropriate next week if we need to push off to have more time. One question I would be interested to know is where does this ordinance overlap with where the firefighters are interested in fundraising? Is it only a couple of intersections? Is it the majority of the intersections we're discussing? If I could just get a list, that would be interesting.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Well, from what the chief's not here, I don't think, but if you want to, from what I know, every fire station is out. You know, like in Oakland, they're out on Seward and Sardu. You know, Fire Station 3 is at 6th and Branner. They're out all over.
Right.
And
The
they're
ordinance
out.
only applies to specific intersections where they would not be permitted to do that, where we
They
have crash
they
data.
could not stand in the intersections on the,
Only specific ones.
I thought it was,
I think as you, Councilmember, as you hear the discussion, there are in the map that's presented, a list of major arterials that are affected by this, and then also a period of congested area in the middle part of the community. So there are a number of streets that are affected. They're primarily the main arterials and not every street. So there would be other alternatives where they could do this. It would be a matter of syncing up where, as mentioned, the locations where they typically have done their fundraising and where we would then have this ordinance in place, and deciding whether or not there are impacts relative to the locations they typically use and those that we would address with this ordinance.
well, and I do know they try to stay in that area of where they're stationed at, so that would be another thing.
Well, and you're absolutely right, because they're fundraising on major arterials, or at least close to it, because that's where the traffic is, and that's where donations come from. So I absolutely agree, we need to be cognizant of that, because it is incredibly important for our community, but it doesn't totally ban them from doing it at all intersections, and so that's why I'm interested in that list. Where does this overlap, and are there workarounds in those situations? Because that would absolutely change the outcome of the vote.
So at this moment, we do have a motion to defer the conversation to next week, the discussion. Councilman Lesser.
I also would not like to defer it. I have absolutely no problem with letting the individuals speak next week, when they do come up. However, the meeting was noticed. We do have two people signed up, Barry Feeker, Mitch Douthat, to speak on it, who've been here since 6 o'clock. There again, I have no problem, and I would welcome them to be able to speak next week, but I think we should at least get the ball rolling with the discussion. Thank you.
Well, that's fine. I just want to say that, being, respectful to them, they've asked me to bring it before you. So whatever the vote is, that's fine. But they just want to make sure that the MDA guy gets to be heard, because it's important to them.
Absolutely.
And having said all that, without saying any more, I forgot my cell phone at work, so I have not communicated to my babysitter that I'm not there, so I'm going to have to leave after I vote, and I apologize.
Councilwoman Hiller.
I'm not going to be here next week, and I have some questions as well as some comments that I would like to be able to share. If you all vote on it, that's fine. But so in terms of talking about it tonight, there's a personal interest in being part of that conversation as well.
So the nice thing is that regardless of whether we hear the conversation tonight, it is not a voting matter. So we can determine next week, when we are taking a look at the item, that we do need additional time to ponder on the information we have received, so at that point in time, we can delay. So, exactly. So I think that at this point in time, we have a motion and a second, and we will proceed with the voting. And the motion at this point in time would be to delay the discussion, not the voting, just a discussion about this ordinance.
So a yes vote means we would
A
delay.
yes vote means that you're delaying it, a no vote means that we have the conversation tonight, just as a preliminary.
Looks like we have 6 no. So we'll discuss there. Oh. We have 6 no, Mayor De La Isa and Councilmembers Ortiz, Emerson, and Padilla voted yes.
Okay, so the motion fails, which means that we have the discussion. I had it confused in my head. It's okay, it all worked out.
Thank you for calling.
Yes.
Appreciate your support, man.
So we proceed with the discussion.
Oh,
Mayor, members of the council, my name is Luther Gagne. I'm an assistant city attorney and I'm also the legal advisor for the police department. I've got 2 subjects to talk about, 2 presentations. The first one is related to traffic and pedestrian safety, and the second one concerns camping and storage of personal property on public ground. Kind of starting from the beginning of how we came up with this, we looked at data involving traffic accidents and different intersections and streets throughout the city over a period of time from going all the way back to 2010. And what you see here is a list of those locations that have the highest crash rates, automobile accidents. The second list is of those, the locations that had the highest rates of injury, accidents, or fatalities. And you notice most of these are the same areas that we see on both lists. We took this information and expanded it, put it into a graph. These statistics, they come from KDOT. They also takes a little bit of time to get up to date with 2017 numbers, so we've supplemented them with numbers from the Topeka Police Department to get it as close to current as we can. What this shows overall from 2010 is there's been an increase overall in pedestrian accidents throughout the city. And then, not surprisingly, when you have a vehicle hitting a pedestrian, most of the time it's going to be an injury. So we also have an increase in injury accidents to pedestrians from that same period of time. This slide is a little erratic. It's showing fatalities over that same period. Go back just a second here. We have a lot of injuries. We don't have a whole lot of fatalities. So it varies pretty dramatically from year to year just because there's not many of them. Taking that information, starting to build an ordinance, what we came up with is identifying those intersections, those streets that are the most, have the highest rates of injuries and fatalities for pedestrians. And these are the locations that we came up with. The ordinance designates these as arterial streets. And I'll get to the significance of that term in just a minute, but as an arterial street, we're talking about Wanamaker between 29th and 10th, Fairlawn between 29th and Huntoon, Gage between 29th and Huntoon, 21st between Wanamaker and Gage, and 29th Street between Wanamaker and Adams. And those are our areas with the highest number of pedestrian injury accidents. The ordinance also has a second, in addition to arterial streets, we have this thing called a congested area. That is not a specific street, it's an area of several streets where there are a number of accidents occurring in that geographical area. This ordinance would create the designation of a congested area, essentially the downtown area. There's a definition there of exactly what streets it's bordered by, but it's essentially the downtown area. The significance of this ordinance is it's going to place restrictions on an arterial street or a congested area. And I'll go through those restrictions in just a second, but that's what the ordinance applies to. If it's not an arterial street and it's not in a congested area, there's no restriction. People will be able to do what they've always been able to do. This map's a little small, but the orange lines on there, those are the arterial streets that I was just mentioning. And the green area is the congested area. Those are those locations where the statistics are showing the highest numbers of pedestrian accidents. So the essential part of what exactly does the ordinance do, does three things. The first thing it does is it makes it unlawful for a pedestrian and a vehicle to have a transfer of any item on one of those arterial streets. There's 5 of them, or within a congested area. It's intended to prohibit a pedestrian from being in the roadway, on the median, on the side of the street, the right-of-way, attracting the attention of a car in order to facilitate a transfer of anything. It also prohibits anybody from standing on the center medians unless they are actually engaged in the process of trying to cross the street. That's the second thing it does. And the third thing it does is has a restriction on activating crosswalk signals. The point of the crosswalk signal is to stop traffic so a pedestrian can cross the street. This restricts that so somebody cannot stand there and repeatedly activate the crosswalk and continue to stand on the median. One thing about these, the restrictions on pedestrians interacting with vehicles, that only applies, again, if the street, the location where this is happening has been designated as an arterial street or a congested area. That's a small number of locations throughout the city that we're talking about. Same thing with the standing on a median. It only applies to an arterial street or in the congested area. It doesn't just apply to the pedestrian. It applies to both parties to this, the pedestrian and the driver. There's a restriction that makes it unlawful for the driver to park, stop, or leave a vehicle standing in order to respond or engage in a transfer with that pedestrian. So the enforcement piece of this applies to pedestrians and drivers both equally. Exceptions. There's a number of exceptions. And talk about the congested area. Again, we're only talking about streets. Doesn't apply to parking garages, parking lots, alleys, any number of other places that you could think of. This is applying to streets. Does not apply to people that are legally using the crosswalk. A pedestrian that's engaged in trying to cross the street. That's not what this is intended for. Doesn't apply to law enforcement, emergency services, tow trucks, broke down vehicles, any type of emergency that's going on under that exception. It does not apply to road repair or maintenance, and it does also not apply to anything that has been given a special event designation by the council. It is a criminal ordinance. It's designated as a misdemeanor. The penalty as an unclassified misdemeanor is up to $499 fine and 30 days in jail. And that's our basic penalty under city code. But again, the idea of this is identifying those locations where the highest number of pedestrian injury accidents are occurring and restrict what's going on at just those locations. That's all I have for that one. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Do we have any questions for Luther? Councilwoman Heller?
I thought she'd go first.
Oh,
Get
I
rid of
did-
my
I
big
saw
newt-
you first.
That's all right. Of these accidents, have any of them involved, pedestrian accidents, have any of them involved people who were soliciting money or other exchanges that you know of?
We have not broken it down that far that I'm aware of.
I mean, I know where you're going with it and trying to set something up, but has this really been a problem with people who are panhandling?
Well, it doesn't apply to panhandling specifically. This is
Understood.
about pedestrians, for whatever reason, that they're in the street or on the medians. And for purposes of this, that's what we looked at, is a pedestrian being hit by a car. And we weren't really looking at what they were doing at the intersection.
Understood. I have a few, if I may.
Yes, Councilwoman Heller?
The term arterial is used in planning. It's a designation of a whole interconnected series of streets in our city. So I'm surprised that you're using arterial here with a different definition. Can you help me with that?
Well, it is a term of art, I guess, so to speak, that's unique to this set of ordinances. This ordinance, we patterned this after something very similar to what Wichita has, and the ordinance defines what we mean by arterial, and that's the limit of its application, is within this set of ordinances.
Well, but it duplicates a word that's used all the time in the city. And so, but it limits it and defines it differently, so for further consideration, it would seem that maybe we in Topeka should come up with something else.
I don't know that
If we
there's
would do
any,
it.
Councilman, I don't know that there's any magic language to the word arterial for purposes of this ordinance. You could call it primary streets or high-risk streets, or.
Well,
because
it's
a
something to
defined
consider.
term.
I mean, I remember, it's funny, we were just in a meeting, been in lots of meetings the last couple of weeks where since I've been on council, the legal did a sweep and tried to get rid of the definitions in different sections of the municipal code and get them all centralized and make sure they were all synchronized. And so I just think we probably need to consider the use of that term if we're going to go forward with this ordinance. Also, of course, I represent the, quote, congested area, and the outline is remarkably similar to what the police department used to call the box, which we got them to stop using because it was difficult to live with. And so why in particular was that area picked out? We don't have much people standing on the street in that area. We did, for a little while at 12th and Lane, but why the, quote, congested area and every street?
Well, again, what we're doing is we're looking at pedestrian accidents and not necessarily what the pedestrian was doing. This was a cluster where you couldn't identify a particular street, but they were clustered within a small geographic area, is how we came up with that, where pedestrians were being hit by cars.
Well, I'm a little troubled with the elephant in the room kind of thing. I mean, we do have a block or so in that area that's known for prostitution. I don't know that people stop cars, but they don't necessarily exchange goods through the window. Just trying to figure out where we go with that.
Well, this ordinance was written to be content neutral. We're not targeting any particular group based on what they're saying or what they're doing.
I understand
This
that.
applies to all pedestrians.
But for somebody, and this is mostly residential streets, for it to be illegal to just walk up to a car and exchange something through the window on a residential street, and the risk of being profiled and being targeted when you were just doing what you usually did, meeting the babysitter or whatever and changing house keys, troubles me. in terms of this congested area zone. I think that's all I had for this one. Thank you.
Councilwoman Clear and then Councilman Lesser. Oh, no, actually, it was Cohen, pardon me.
Can you give me an example of a special event that would not be, is an exception?
A parade, maybe, I guess.
So it would just be from a very small, limited, I was just trying to think how many people would be standing on the median during what special event? So they can get a permit to stand there?
No, the permit, the purpose of this ordinance would be that it would not apply if there had been some kind of special event permit issued by the city. So
For that
whether they're on the
particular block?
median or out in the street and engaging with a vehicle and its driver, the ordinance wouldn't apply if there's been a special event permit.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Cohen and then Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Mayor. We haven't done this in the past because of, the ACLU suing cities that do this. And is this one different, that it seems like we're not going to get sued if we go down this road?
Well, I can't tell you that we won't get sued. The important question is it constitutional? And we've written this ordinance, and we believe it is. We've studied ordinances from many different cities. And this ordinance is not discriminating based on the speech of the pedestrian. We're not targeting panhandlers, we're not targeting solicitors or lemonade stands or going out of business. It applies to everybody. It's intended to be content neutral, and that's also going to be probably the difficulty with it, because it is going to encompass some groups that you may not expect. But the content neutrality and the limitation of only applying to a few specific locations leaves other alternatives for people to engage in those activities, just not here. We believe that would be constitutional then, the way we've written it.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Lesser.
Couple things and a question. I think maybe to clarify, special event would possibly be a parade where they exchange the candy from the car going to the
Sure.
like that, as part of like a special event. The only thing I understand, Karen, what you're saying about the congested area. It's not talking about an exchange.
Mike,
Do
you have your mic on?
I'm sorry. It's not talking about an exchange in the driveway or where somebody's, pulled over and I've never stood on my corner and exchanged anything with my wife or anybody else on my street or anything like that. It's either done in the yard, it's either done at my house. I don't stand on a median in my neighborhood or at a corner to exchange things. So I think that maybe that's a little clarification on, on that. I do have a question. The question is has there looked at, because I know that the concern of the MDA, which in lieu is the fire department, and their campaign for the boots, have we looked at that from a perspective of, is there an ability for a permit for those individuals, or have you researched that and found that it's going to have to be encompassing for everyone?
No, we have looked at that, and the difficulty with doing that is that you start getting into making choices based on what they're saying. They're asking for solicitations for this charity, or they're asking for something for this, or they're asking for food or money, or you're making distinctions then based on what the person is saying. And that's where these ordinances run into trouble.
Right, and I guess, would you also run into the same trouble if it was a city, where we talk about maintenance crews, all those, if there was an exception for city employees? Have we researched that, being the fact that they are city employees?
I don't think we looked at it specifically from that angle, no, but we could.
I'm just trying to throw different ideas out there.
Sure.
Councilwoman Clear.
Would that not be a special event? Muscular dystrophy?
No, Councilmember Clear, we've defined in the special event ordinance what special events are, and those are the things like parades or the tap that, or where you're blocking streets and they go get a particular permit.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Luther, thanks for your presentation. I had just a question. I'm looking at the map, and maybe you explain this. I was out of the room for a few minutes. I apologize. But, for instance, Southwest 21st Street, are the yellow lines where this right now would be prohibited? Or is the text in the ordinance?
Well, that was the idea, but on the map that you had, there's some extra yellow lines on there that was unintended. Those should have been removed. The locations that I read out loud.
Okay, sure, yeah.
These are the locations. Now,
Okay.
there's some extra yellow lines on there that are for other locations, and that is not included in the language of the ordinance.
I guess my question then is, like Southwest 21st, it looks like from Wanamaker to Gage, it is prohibited, but then 21st all the way to, well, to the east boundaries of the city is not. But yet there are two intersections there of 21st that are the highest. 21st and Adams, for instance, is the highest total fatalities and injuries at an intersection. I guess, can you tell me, explain the methodology, or, and I guess as a follow-up to that, are we concerned that if we do this in certain areas, all we're doing is displacing the problem? We're moving these solicitations or, in anything that may be just to other areas?
The answer, I think, is a little complicated. The methodology is we can't restrict every place. We have to leave avenues out there for people to do these kinds of things. And in making the choices to select what line to draw on the map, we're picking the locations with the highest accidents. And there may be some where there are accidents happening that don't make the list. That's just basically making the choice to leave ample alternative for people to engage in these types of activities and speech, free of restriction.
Thank you for that. And I guess that's my question. At 21st and Adams, it has the purple dot, which says highest total fatalities and injuries at an intersection. So it's one of the three places that has the highest, and yet it's not. So if you could just look at that, please, between now and next week.
Sure.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I just want to summarize what I think you're trying to do here. So basically, you've looked at all the crash data we have available, identified areas where a crash is likely to occur based on the probability, based on the history of that intersection. And the idea here is that we're going to attempt to prevent fatalities from happening by not allowing people to stand around. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Gagne? If not, I guess we proceed with the second portion of the presentation.
Let's see this thing. Okay, this is concerning the camping and storage of personal property. This is a set of ordinances that covers not only camping, but the things that go along with camping that people may leave on public property. This first slide is kind of just a list of general principles, general ideas of what the problem is. There's a number of issues that cities all over the country are dealing with. Obstructions of right-of-ways, loss of use of the public property, public urination and defecation without adequate sanitation facilities, infestations, litter, pollution, health hazards such as discarded needles and bed bugs, fleas, things like that. Damage to property and infrastructure, socioeconomic and businesses, and then crime on a general matter such as increased burglary and theft and things like that. What I have here is a series of pictures. I've been out with the police. I work with them. I go out and I've seen a lot of this myself. Some of these pictures the police department took for me with their unmanned aerial vehicle. Some of them, I got a couple of them from code enforcement on things that they've cleaned up, but it's kind of a representative of different areas of the city. It's not just one area. This is all over the city. It's out there. This is a bridge in North Topeka. There's a camp underneath the main part of the bridge there. Somebody's also brought in a couch. We can't just go out and pick up that couch and throw it away. That belongs to somebody. So we need a process of how do we get that couch out of there and allow the person to either claim it and remove it, or we remove it and discard it. This is inside that same camp under the bridge, some of the things that are in there. This was over recently, a couple of months ago, across the street from the shelter. It was there was 3 different places there on the side of the sidewalk. This is a structure that's been built out of scrap lumber and tarps and plastic along the bank of the river. This is actually one of those aerial pictures that I talked about that the police took back a few weeks ago. Without the leaves, you can actually see from the air what's down there. This is along the bank of the river. Part of the challenge is after the people have left, a large part of this stuff stays behind, and it either stays there or somebody has to go out and clean it up. This is actually out not too far from Wanamaker on a piece of undeveloped commercial property. In this photograph, the people were actually using these large metal tubes as shelter.
Pretty cool.
And they had built fires in one of them. This photograph is from the west side of town along the bank of the river, out by the railroad property. It's a fairly large encampment. They've actually supplemented their tents with wooden and different logs and limbs and stuff like that, and tarps. This is from back out of Wanamaker, another undeveloped commercial property. A little hard to tell in this photograph, but this was the structure that was there. And well, I got another picture I'll show in a second. But also out around the Wanamaker area, this person was using a cardboard box that they had wrapped in plastic. And what you can't see in this picture is the bugs and the sanitation problem. This is out in the trees on the side of a hill, and there was no sanitation facilities. and I'll just leave it at that. This is a deck along the river. A lot of times this is what some of these areas look like after the person has moved on. This is what they leave behind. This was one that code enforcement actually cleaned up not too long ago. It was out by the river. So what this ordinance does is it attempts to restrict camping. That's the first thing it does. And there's a set of ordinances that deal with that. And what we mean by camping is using public property to sleep. Tents, tarps, boxes, things like that. Or using private property without the written permission of the landowner. This is not just happening along the river. It's out on commercial properties, different vacant properties. It's all over the place. So it applies to not only public, but private, unless they've got the written permission of the landowner to be there. It does not the definition of what we mean by public property, property that's owned, managed, or maintained by the city. We get into a lot of technical questions about, well, what about the levees? What about, the river bank and Corps of Engineers and all these different legal mechanisms of how ownership is split up? The way we address that in here is if it's owned, managed, or maintained by the city, then we consider it to be public property. And that will cover a lot of those areas like levees and the river banks and stuff like that. Also applies to streets, alleys, easements, public rights of way, anything like that. There's an exception that we put into this for activities that normally are associated with the expected use of that property. This is not intended to stop families from having a camp out in the backyard of a residential neighborhood. That's something you would expect to occur. It's not prohibiting things, events at the zoo or something like that, where the facility is hosting that type of event. That's considered to be normally associated with the use of the property. And that's not what this is intended to prevent. One of the challenges of this ordinance is a constitutional problem, basically, is we cannot criminalize being homeless. There's significant constitutional arguments about cruel and unusual punishment, looking at a person's ability to comply with whatever the law is. So that leads into a discussion that we have to consider a person's ability to comply versus their willingness to comply. Where that fits in with this ordinance is there's limitations on when it can be enforced. We can't just go out and start arresting. We're not going to go out and start arresting homeless people. That's not what this is about. This has a built-in requirement before law enforcement can make an arrest or issue a citation. They have to do certain things. They have to warn the person, give them an opportunity to leave. Hey, you can't camp here. This is public property. You're not allowed to do this. You need to leave. Give them that opportunity. Then they must inquire if the person is in need of medical or any type of social services and allow them to do that if they are. Maybe they need to go to detox for drugs or alcohol. They need mental health services, any of those types of things. Finally, if the person is in need of shelter for the night, have to offer them a shelter space in a public shelter and give them the opportunity to do that. It's only after they either don't need it or refuse all of those things that the ordinance then, the enforcement mechanism piece of this then kicks in, and the officer is allowed to either issue a citation or make an arrest. because then it's become a unwillingness to comply and not simply an inability to comply. We've offered them the options, they've refused to take them. That's the camping piece of this. The second piece of this is storage of personal property on these same types of areas. This only applies to public property, prohibits the failure to remove personal property after 24 hours of written notice. That written notice is a big piece of this. It requires law enforcement to give them notice on the front end. You're not allowed to have your property stored here. You need to remove it. You got 24 hours to do it. If they don't, and it's not removed, then the city can come back and clean it up, impound that property, but we have to hold it for a while. And this is restrictions again that we've looked at, ordinances from around the country on how to build something that we believe is constitutional. So after 24 hours, if it's still there, we can remove it. But we store it for a period of 90 days and allow them to come get it and claim it. This particular slide is about exceptions, places where we don't have to give notice. We can remove it immediately. If it's stored within so many feet of a driveway or entrance, if the property has a specified closing date, closing time, like a park, and it closes at 10 p.m., then there's no notice required in that situation. Property that poses an immediate public health and safety threat can be removed immediately, and evidence of a crime or contraband. Those are the kind of a narrow list of things where we don't have to give notice. All of these pictures that I showed, those would all require notice to be given for the person to, they've got 24 hours to remove it. That's the pre-removal notice. That the idea of the ordinance is that that is something, that notice is served on the person individually. We hand them a piece of paper, here's your notice. Or it can be posted at the location where the property is. Say they go out and they find the encampment, there's nobody there, they can post the notice on a tree or on a stake or a pole, or the notice can be posted at the location where the property is. Once the 24 hours passes, the property can be removed, and there's then a post-removal second notice where we've now removed the property and we leave a second notice saying the city has removed it, this is what we removed, this is how you reclaim it if you want to. We give them the instructions on how to get it back, where it's at, how they can claim it. And we also tell them that they've got a period of 90 days. That notice would also say that they've got 90 days to reclaim it, or the city will dispose of it then as abandoned. There's a section that it's kind of a technical section on the mechanics of what we do with the property after we clean it up. We take it to a storage place. We're going to store it for 90 days, dispose of it if it's not claimed. Finally, the last piece of this is also a misdemeanor, like the traffic pedestrian safety, unclassified misdemeanor, $499 fine, up to 30 days in jail, or standard penalty for an ordinance violation. Any questions?
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. There was a time when we were talking about doing this, and they said, you know, that they're smart, that you approach them, that they can't camp here, and they'll just go stand on the tree line or something, which is out of public property, and then all of a sudden everything was okay, and when the police left, they just went back to what they were doing, and things like that. Is that will be covered because they don't have the written consent. Is that right?
The written consent, and this is, it's broad enough where it's defining camp in terms of what's present there. You got tents and tarps and cookware and fires and bedding. So it wouldn't be as simple as a person just walking across the street or something and they're no longer applying to them because you've still got all of that stuff that's there.
And somewhere else, I had heard discussion that some of these people don't want help. They just want to be left alone. And so if we put this on there, aren't we doing what Councilman Emerson said, is just kind of pushing the problem out somewhere else?
Well, that's kind of getting at what I was talking about, this balance that we have to do between ability to comply and willingness to comply. There are people out there that need help, that we need to help. And the ordinance requires law enforcement to do that before the enforcement piece of this kicks in. Getting them medical or mental health help, getting them, offering them, transportation to a shelter. It's those that refuse, that choose to stay out there voluntarily is the enforcement piece of this.
I think Councilman Lusser, did you have a statement? And then Deputy Mayor. and then-
On the providing notice for private property without the written consent of the property owner, would we still have to give notice on something like that?
Mike.
Say it again.
Damn it.
No, my question was, would we still have to, if it is private property, have to provide all those notices?
The private property is a little different when it comes to the storage piece of this. The notices and stuff like that I was mentioning, that only applies if they're storing stuff on public property. If it's private property, then they can either get their stuff and claim it, or we already have mechanisms for dealing with that through property maintenance code or trespassing laws or stuff like that. Sure.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. As far as I understand, you've covered this, but just to reiterate for the watching public, Black Friday, I believe still people camp out
Yeah.
in front of stores
Yeah.
to get deals that may or may not exist. My guess is the store owners they're not going to object to it, but they probably aren't going to hand out written permission for people to camp the night before.
No, but I think that would be something that we would probably consider to be incidental to the normal expected use of the property.
Okay.
And we expect that kind of thing. with a
I figured
retail
as
store.
much. I mean, because Best Buy is expecting people to come and shop there on Friday morning.
Right. Especially on a holiday.
Yes,
If
I would
any
agree.
other day of the week, there's
Okay.
somebody behind the store and behind the dumpster or something like that.
Fantastic. So everybody can still camp out in front of their favorite store, except for me. I will definitely not be doing that.
Yes, you can.
Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. You define public property in here as all property that is owned, managed, or maintained by the city. But what is our jurisdiction over parks? Because couldn't this conceivably move the problem into our county parks within the city?
It actually wouldn't. That was one of the things we looked at specifically is you go back and look at the contract that transferred ownership of the parks from the city to the county. We have a piece in that contract where we agree to continue enforcement of city ordinances on that property. So this is going to apply to parks.
Okay, owned, managed, or maintained by the city. But it seems like your definition excludes them. Maybe it doesn't, but again, if you could look at that. Because it means all property that is owned, managed, or maintained by the city.
Right, we've got a separate authority in our contract with the county where we transferred those parks to them, where we agreed to continue enforcing city ordinances. This would become a city ordinance that we would enforce. Do you follow me?
Right, but you're saying it's not public property, because only public property is only the property that is owned, managed, or maintained by the city.
No, it is public property. It's just this ordinance is defining what it's going to, the type of property it's going to apply to. that contract is also defining,
So managed
Kind
is,
of-
I mean, brings it in under managed?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you're the attorney, I'm not. so. Thank you.
It works. I'm not explaining it very well, but it does.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, he's right.
Councilwoman Heller.
One about the technicalities of the enforcement and one about the river. The technicalities of the enforcement, I know we've had situations with policing trying to enforce things, and people said but, and they couldn't prove it one way or another, so they had to be believed. Is there a need for language in here that says, that further requires the person to not only have written permission, but to be able to display it at the time? So that you wouldn't run into a situation where somebody says, well, I did have permission from,
Well, I believe that they would, that's where this warning piece of it is the law enforcement officer would give them the warning that they've got, they can't be there if they can't produce the permission. Then the warning would be given, they can't be there, they come back, they haven't left, or they can't produce the permission, then it would potentially be
I
enforced.
just wanted to make sure if we needed to have language in there that said you've got to be able to produce it, so they couldn't just say, I have it, but I lost it, or, you know,
We
fell
could
in the
add that.
river, or
It wouldn't hurt, certainly.
just a suggestion, if legally it would just
Sure.
make it easier for the police or whoever's enforcing. The other question I had is about the river. We're about to open up the river and encourage it for recreation, and people now can camp on sandbars or on the side of the river legally. And so do we, before we would, I mean, you've done a wonderful job crafting this and explaining it as well, but I don't want us to have unintended consequences. And so do we need to kind of get ahead of this and perhaps have an agreement with the county or have a plan internally in the city that we would provide camping permits? If we want anybody who's camping on the river or on the river banks to have a permit, do we need to think through a permitting process?
We looked at that issue while we were drafting this, and it's actually addressed under state law on where does the river end and the private property begin. And the river is considered public property, open to canoeing or camping or whatever. And it's generally the stream bed of the river. And once you get up out of that average, I forget what there's a term for it that they call what the normal flow channel of the river is.
Right.
That's where you can camp. And once you get out of that, that's when it becomes private property, or in some cases, if the government owns it, it's public property again.
Right.
But we could issue permits if we wanted to allow people. This ordinance doesn't have a permit system in it.
I'm just, you're defining a little bit, I mean, we all need to know where that line is, I guess, and we need to have a plan. It would be wise for us to have a plan now, since we're gonna be redoing the weir and opening up, and there's a cleanup at the weir on Saturday, for instance, where lots of volunteers are gonna be encouraged to come and help clean it up, and that in part is to engage them in being part of us opening up the river. Just think we need to think through that, when camping would be legal and how we would do it.
I know the state's actually got a guide out there for people about camping along the river. I've seen it and I've looked at it. If we wanted to go beyond that, we would need a permit system in order to protect people from enforcement of this.
I guess I would encourage us to think it through. I looked through the rest of the ordinance and I wondered, for instance, on page 3, in line 66, your section is on unlawful camping, and it says that unlawful and a public nuisance for any person to camp in the following areas. 1, any public property. So maybe similar to what you have on number 2, it needs to say any public property without the consent in writing of the property owner, which would be us. But at least if we're writing that, we could give someone permission. There have been times when Boy Scout troops were coming through town and people wanted them to be able to camp out next to the various places that I've been involved in talking about it. So if we need to have some sort of permitting, we didn't need permits before, so people just worked it out and did it. But if we need a permitting process, again, I think of scouts in parks or for events, we might want to consider that. I did see toward the end on page 6, your removal and pre-removal notice gives, I guess, anybody the right to a warning and, in effect, 24 hours. And so the way this is written, I guess anybody could camp overnight. They might get a visit from somebody, but they wouldn't be removed until the next day. Again, just trying to think it through. We want to be welcoming. We want to encourage their recreation and people using our public spaces. So perhaps visiting, I mean, there's a full section in Heartland Visioning for Activate the River of people who are putting, there's going to be a big float on the 26th of this month. They might have some ideas on how to regulate and how to do it. That'd be it.
City Manager?
Mayor, thank you. There is one, and it's not included, I don't think, but there was a map, Karen, that staff created that references those areas along the riverbank. And so we are looking at that area. And if those indeed are areas that we will want to allow recreational camping, we'll need to figure that out.
Right.
But
Thanks.
we're aware of those areas, and if that is indeed something we want to consider in the future, we'll address it.
Well, I think we really should. Thank you. And it drives just to complicate it a little more into the issue as we develop the river as to what our relationship is with the county in terms of managing all sorts of activities on the river and whether we want to engage them in some of that conversation as well. Thanks.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. To continue that conversation, if we just have designated camp spots along the river, then that solves that problem, wouldn't it?
Yes.
It could.
So as a planning mechanism, that's, I mean, realistically, when you're trying to plan out a recreational area, you want designated campsites anyway with proper fire pits, sanitation, and that sort of thing. So that would eliminate, I shouldn't say eliminate, it would help contain the camping issue to some degree into areas where it's designed to handle that. I don't necessarily know that we want people just camping by the river willy-nilly anyway, just because it's such a dangerous area. I would think that as part of the planning for that, we would need to have designated camping spots anyhow.
If I could respond, it could
Yes,
be
ma'am.
handled sort of like wilderness camping is, where you get a backcountry permit and you can go wherever you want, but at least people know you're there. And so I wouldn't want us to over-regulate it at all, but I think with this idea, then we have to think of the flip side, that's all.
Agreed.
So if there's no more comments from the body or questions for Mr. Gagne, we do have 2 individuals signed up for public comment. First one being Mr. Barry Peaker.
Good evening again. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to this tonight. If it wasn't already more complicated, let me make it a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
Sure. The issue of the camping, the panhandling, is a surface issue. These are what we see, but we don't always understand the reasons behind it. One of the things that we have in this community that is just stellar, and many other communities are envious of us, is the generosity and compassion of citizens to try to help people who are in need. That's why we have some of the great things that we have in this community. Unfortunately, it's very hard to tell who's in need and why they're in need. You know, what is the issue that they're presenting to you? You know, is everybody legit? Is everybody actually going to use the resources that are given to them in the right way? We're talking about 2 different issues, but they're related. One is panhandling, one is camping. And so while this is an issue in the community of Topeka, this is a national challenge. And there are many, many communities that would love to have the generosity that we have, but nevertheless, they still have the same problem that we have. In other words, they don't know what to do about it. And so many attempts for legislation have not worked so well because of civil liberties, because people will generously give to people, break those civil liberties, and you don't want to punish people for being nice. And so there are some new things that are on the horizon. There are a number of communities around the country that we've been studying for quite some time that combines legislation, ordinances, and pro-action to try to help community to deal with these kind of issues, and public-private partnerships to be able to reach people and identify what those particular needs are. It cannot be decided in a night like tonight. It would take an extensive study of a task force coming together to be able to work around what can we do to help enforce some of this, but also equip the city, the county, private individuals, organizations like Topeka Rescue Mission and different outreaches to be able to do things. An example would be, in a number of communities, they have vehicles and systems that go out to panhandlers and offer them a day job. And in so doing, they have, the city would have the possibility of park cleanups, which is county now, but different things that could be done, and they would offer a day's wage for that. They would offer a meal, possibly 2 meals. They would offer that person to be returned right back to their camp or the place where they were panhandling if they wanted to go there, or offer them shelter if there was room in the shelter, or additionally offer them some other services such as substance abuse help, mental health treatment, whatever. What happens so oftentimes in these kind of situations where somebody is entrenched in panhandling, entrenched in outdoor camping, is that there are, again, all those issues of why that's happening in the first place. And until there's a trust relationship that is developed, that is not going to work well until we are able to do that. So it will take numerous times of being able to reach out. We've been doing this for about 10 years through Street Reach and collaborations through the community. Nationally, it's estimated that it takes about 70 positive contacts before someone will receive services from you when they are what we call chronically homeless or chronically in need. And so what other communities are beginning to do is that they're spending some money, but they're being able to come along and offer people a different alternative. I think our community, if they understood that we had a better alternative rather than just an ordinance, which is going to create a lot of challenges for this body if they say no more panhandling or no more camping outdoors because you're not being kind to those who are in need. If there was an understanding that we have options, we have alternatives for them, I think it would go a long way. So I wanted to contribute that tonight in my last 3 seconds and take any questions if you have them.
How much time would you need for extension, Mr. Speaker?
Oh, several weeks, but I'll take another couple of minutes.
I vote no.
I have to warn you that
I'll vote with you if I
have 23 minutes left in the meeting.
Just a couple more minutes.
5 minutes?
2.
2?
And then I'll
Okay,
take
we have a motion for extension for 2 minutes. We have a second. We proceed with the voting.
Not that I don't love your talk.
Thank you. I love to talk. Just don't love to talk at this time.
We have 9 yes.
Thank you so much. We've been studying this for a number of years. I have a list of different cities that it's worked really well in. Portland, Maine has got one of the most stellar opportunities, I think, that for us to learn from. We have the Capital City Outreach Team, which is a conglomeration of a number of different organizations and entities that are working all the time to reach out to our unsheltered homeless in the community. I am encouraged that this body is taking this step to look at this issue, and I would love for it to be able to be solved by legislation, but it can't be. And but if we can take and look at this and maybe craft it in such a way that we all work together and create something very unique for our community, but learn from other communities, we're willing to do that. And so that will take a little bit more time, but I just want to leave that with you tonight in this discussion as you go forward. We can do this. It won't be perfect. It won't be totally clean. It's not going to meet every need. But there's some serious issues in our community with safety issues and biohazards and people who really basically are being enabled to stay right where they are because of the generosity of other people. We just want to give some people another opportunity on both sides, both the generosity as well as those who are out there to be able to get the kind of help they need.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Appreciate you coming to speak to us tonight.
Thank you.
I love your outreach ideas and the concept behind that. I think that's an important part. Do these ordinances fit in with that, or are you discussing that as an alternative to them?
I think these ordinances with some modification fit into that.
Okay. I'd be interested to know what your ideas on that. You don't have to go through them tonight. If you'd have a chance to email them to me, I'd love to hear them because I think this is a great first step, and I'd love to tweak it so that, I mean, the best partnerships we have in the community are public-private partnerships. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to create yet another one.
Thank you. I agree.
Thank you.
Additional comments for Reverend Peaker? Okay, thank you very much.
Good night. Thank you.
The next person we have to signed up to speak is Mr. Mitch Dewitt. Did I say it correctly?
Dodge it, do it. I've heard all kinds of different things. But my name is Mitch Douthit, and I manage Shunga Properties, which owns a building at 1100 Wanamaker, which is kind of right in the middle of all this. And about 2 years ago, we started having a significant increase in the number of unwanted people coming by and whatnot. I mean, being on Wanamaker, generally this type of stuff always happened to a certain degree, but whatnot. Like this morning, there was a guy sleeping next to the front door at 8:30 in the morning. And my building has about 80 or so people who work in it. 5 of them are male, the other 75 are women. It's almost, the largest renter I have is Child Care Aware, which is a nonprofit that helps educate them. They stay late at night to run their classes. They have to lock up and stuff at that point, because I go through and I lock up every night about 6:30, but they run later than that and have to deal with that. They talk about moving them elsewhere or dealing with it not, but my tenants are scared now. They're not worried and whatnot. And like I had to replace a bunch of doors that mechanically functioned just fine, but people wanted the panic bar and whatnot. So that was $5,000 to replace doors that function, and now I got on the back door, I got to do the same thing with that. So that's going to be another $5,000 coming out of my pocket next month for that. I mean, it's become a constant. It used to be just a little bit in the summers, every now and then, a few years back, but even now in the winter, it doesn't even break like it used to. And I don't know, I get tired of having to deal with it personally on my almost everyday basis as I manage these buildings and worry about the people coming in and out of them. And I find backpacks left, I find people that sleeping around. People come up to people in the cars, people as they sit in the parking lot in the cars, bang on their window and ask for money. I mean, it's just been getting worse and worse in the area. I mean, it sounds like this ordinance would go a long ways to help that, and I hope it does. Guess that's about it.
Okay, thank you for your comments. So council, we have had a presentation and we have heard public comments. Again, tonight's item was merely for discussion, just to get us ready for the following week in which we're going to have an actual item up for vote. If you have additional comments, of course, as usual, route those to the city manager. He can go ahead and get them back to staff so that you can go and elaborate on that. Are there any other comments or suggestions at this point? Seeing none?
Sure.
Pardon me, Deputy Mayor.
My only comment was going to be that I appreciate the creativity that the staff has exercised here in trying to create a workable solution that will help identify a number of problems in the community. I know when we talked about this a couple of years ago, it was going to be quite the challenge to come up with something. I think we have a good foundation. I'm excited to work with Mr. Feaker here to help tailor it to really help those people that are in need. And I just want to thank everybody who's helped with that so far.
Thank you. Councilwoman Heller.
Especially since I won't be here next week, I find myself uncomfortable with the map in the pedestrian ordinance, and also trying to make the connection. It won't help his problem in his parking lot, won't help him with a problem at his doors. I'm not comfortable with that one. I'm okay with working on just about anything, but I feel like we've got an approach over here and a problem over here, and I'm not sure that they're connecting. And to look at where the streets are, I think it's which ones the solicitation will be banned on. It's geographically really uneven. Just to ban it in southwest Topeka and then pick the box to balance it or something, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no additional comments, We now proceed to the public comment section, to the announcements portion. If the clerk would read the preliminary agenda.
May 8th agenda includes 2 proclamations, National Travel and Tourism Week and the Economic Development Week. There are no presentations at this time. For the consent agenda, we have a special event and noise exception for the KU Kickoff Street Party and a special event and noise exception for the 2018 Fiesta Mexicana. And then we will have the ordinances for the traffic and pedestrian safety, an ordinance for camping on public and private property, and then we'll have a resolution regarding Miller's Reserve Subdivision Improvement District, and a discussion on false fire alarms.
Thank you very much. City Manager?
I have no additional announcements.
I'll be prompt. Yesterday, City Manager and I attended the Jump Nehemiah. It was packed. We had, Councilman Padilla was there as well, several of the members of the commission, and Susan Duffy. It was a wonderful event. We had good conversation, and it was a very different atmosphere than what people typically have an idea of what these Nehemiah events would be. I can tell you that it was an event of celebration. A lot of the successes that have been had in the city were celebrated there, and it's been wonderful to see how that relationship that started a little bit tenuous has become more of a partnership. So my congratulations to them. And finally, I have a lot of things, but I just wanted to tell everybody that this body did amazing work this weekend. We had on Saturday a strategic planning session, and it was an event in which there were a lot of great ideas thrown out. We have what we would call the makings of a 2-year plan, and we were very strategic in making those plans 2 years because we understand that we are here on a 2-year basis of rotation. And we wanted to make sure that at the end of the day, we all could work on something that we could say, here it is, and here's the progress that we've made. Great conversation. I want to thank all of you publicly for all of the work that you all put into being there and for just being engaged the whole time. So, Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just would like to thank the staff for the hard work that they did on the CIP. This has been a learning experience for me on a bunch of different levels, and I'm really excited after talking with City Manager Trout, next year how we're going to approach it and understanding. And I again thank everybody for their help in answering questions that I had, clarifying how the process worked, and I'm excited to move forward on it, so thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
I got a list. I will zip through them fast. It has been a heck of a 2 weeks with all the events that have happened, and thanks to everyone involved. There is a lot coming up, but starting with today, my historic Old Town neighborhood between 6th and 10th and Topeka and Washburn is the target neighborhood for the first run at Team Up Cleanup. The forestry department's already been through doing trees, and today the street department came in and popped the bricks on 2 of the 5 worst blocks in town. The 900 block of Buchanan, if you go by, and the 600 block of Taylor. And they just popped just like scraping butter off. They're beautiful. And so I really appreciate the city staff work on all of those. They are planning other events this month for cleanup and so on with volunteers, and we'll see how it all goes. I've been involved at the Aaron Douglas Art Fair for years. I mentioned the art call for artists the other day. The artist reveal is this Friday evening at the Jayhawk Theater, when correspondingly, I think unrelated, but you can cross over, there will be a cello collective rocking the Jayhawk. So who knew? Also, that's First Friday, and there'll be a salsa walk downtown. So a great time to go check out art, cellos, and downtown. Further downtown, there's so much going on. My list got out of order. In 2 weeks will be the 64th anniversary of the Brown v. Board case, and there is a lot going on here that week, and the publicity varies a little bit. For one thing, and I think it's okay to mention this publicly, the UNESCO folks are coming back on Monday and Tuesday the 14th and 15th. Monroe has been will be part of the first string for the UNESCO World Heritage Site application. There will be some events that will be open to the public, so watch for information about that. On the 17th, Brown v. Board is showing a movie called Someday from 6 to 8 p.m. at Monroe School, and it is a film that commemorates the legacy of Linda Brown and the other plaintiffs in the Brown v. Board case. Before that, on the 12th, will be the day that the Arts Connect folks and Michael Toombs come and start the actual painting on the Brown v. Board commemorative mural in the park across the street from Brown v. Board. That will be from noon to 4. There'll be food trucks and food and all sorts of opportunities for people to be there for the kickoff of that process. That will continue on Saturdays after the 12th. So, for instance, on the 19th, that will be going on. The group that I've been involved with that's been working on Sumner and the legacy of Sumner and Monroe is doing bus tours the afternoon of the 19th from 1 to 5. There'll be 4 loop tours between Monroe and Sumner. Those will be guided tours with 10 sites to point out along the way. That is graduation Saturday, but based on the timing of the graduations, any family would be able to come before or after. And they will also have some maps so that people could take their own tour, take the family on their own or use bikes or whatever. So watch for more about that. And I think I will stop there, given the time.
Councilwoman Claire?
I have a few things too. Most of you know that my daughter Casey's the National Vice President and the Commander for Kansas Chapter of Sheepdog. And what's exciting about that is a couple weeks ago they had their gala, and we had our very own Topeka Curtis Kelly, gunner, win the Military Sheepdog of the Year, a national award. So he's been a Marine for 42 years, and in '96 he started teaching ROTC at Topeka High, and he retired in 2017. And a lot of his cadets said he is responsible for their success in their lives, and some even say that's the reason they're still alive. So what a man, what a man. So I'm going to pass these up. Also, I went to a couple of ribbon cuttings, Reese's and Boys and Girls Club, and it's the common thread between them was the commitment and support from the community. They had both thanked all the community for all the support helping with their projects. Then I went to the Designer Showcase House at 1551 Southwest Westover Road that benefits Child Care Aware. And she told me, she goes, you know, the community support for us is overwhelming. So that's 3 different events that they couldn't have held without all the community support. Another thing I want to announce, Oakland's having their garage sales Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Come over. And the Topeka Correctional Facility's annual plant sale started today, and it runs to May 13th from 9 until 3, and you can get good plants at a good price. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple, well, just really one thing. After I left the strategic retreat on Saturday, I went to the Capitol, and my daughter's cheerleading team was getting recognized by Governor Collier. But I guess I just want to thank Governor Collier for taking the time that day. It was not only them, but there was the debate team from Worcester Rural High School. There was a bowling team from Topeka West. But what was really neat, there were teams there from Dodge City, Andover, Atchison. And it made me really, first of all, really appreciate him being there on a Saturday to do this, as well as the state staff. But also how lucky we are to live right here where we can go to the Capitol. I mean, I haven't been there in probably a year or so, and it's just such a beautiful facility. Secondly, the coach for the cheer team, she was mentioning to me that Representative John Alcala, who used to be up here on the council, she just said how helpful he was, and he called several times to follow up and get all this scheduled. So I just really appreciate his service both here on the council for all those years and what he's doing now at the state for our city. So thank you.
Councilman Padilla?
Thank you, Mayor. Did I get it wrong? Okay, thank you. I want to do like Lesser. I just want to follow up real quickly again on the comments about Jump. I want to thank them publicly for inviting us there and to acknowledge what I think were some very brave citizens who showed up there and gave their personal testimonies as to their travels and how they've gone through a lot of hardships and have been given a lot of hope and opportunity because of people like Jump and those organizations that have tried to see beyond what you see on the surface and do everything they can to try and give people the opportunities to participate in Topeka and all the things that we talk about. Not everybody gets to go to those things because they have other priorities like trying to find a place to live, how to get to work. So I want to acknowledge those people who were willing to stand up in front of about 1,000 people and tell about their hardship and how their lives have been changed. So thank you again, Mayor. Also, and City Manager, both of you did a great job of facilitating that retreat. I appreciated it. It was time well spent together. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I too want to comment on the retreat. I thought it was fantastic, an excellent way to spend a Saturday morning, even though it was the first beautiful Saturday. We really accomplished some great things, and I'm going to be excited to see how that stuff rolls out. The mayor and I, for a number of weeks, have been working to coordinate a bit of a town hall with people so we can talk about the sales tax renewal options. And we've got it planned for May 22nd at 5:30 p.m. in Classroom A at the Law Enforcement Center. I'll send you all a meeting request for it. A couple things we really like to talk about. Fundraising methods. You know, what does the city of Topeka have as an option to raise funds? You know, we're not allowed to levy income taxes, that sort of thing. So get a bit of a brief overview about what we can do to raise money to cover things. Talk about what we spent money on with the existing half-cent sales tax that's coming to an end. And talk about what the community wants. What do they want for streets? And, you know, what level of quality are they looking for there? And then try to work on the ballot language and see, you know, right now what we have is fairly limited. Is that what we want to do? Do they want it to be broader? So I'm really, really hopeful that that will help us work with the community to figure out when we go to vote in June what we really need to do and get some public input. So I would love to have you all there. We're going to stream it on City 4 and on the website. So if you can't make it, that's no problem. You can either watch there. Also, if you'll send your questions in advance, you can send them to me or just to the council at large. We'll try to get those answered. And then after you watch the video, if you have questions, also send those in, and we'll try to get them answered in the following council meetings. So really looking forward to this. I'm hopeful it's a huge turnout, and we can really engage the public to sort out what we want to do with this next 10-year sales tax, provided they think we actually need it. Other than that, on Friday, I get the privilege of attending the YP Summit in Manhattan, Kansas. Young people, which I am still one for another couple of years, gather from all across the state to talk about leadership and business, how to advance your career, that sort of thing. And I've been going for longer than I care to publicly admit, but it's really a great thing that this event moves all around the community. It's been in Topeka a number of years ago, and it's just wild to see all of these young professionals that are passionate about the Midwest and passionate about Kansas come together and talk about how do they become leaders in their community. And the mayor was a speaker in Wichita last year, and it was really a phenomenal event. So I'm privileged to get to attend that again Friday. Have a great week, everybody.
Councilman Mays.
I also wanted to echo the gratitude that I have for the planning. So the planning.
Don't get verklempt.
What's that?
Don't get verklempt.
The strategic planning retreat that we had, it was a fantastic exercise. I think a lot of good came from that. And certainly, especially want to thank the city staff that was there, that took half of their Saturday off work to come in and help us out. Also, I wanted to congratulate the zoo. I attended the Roar and Pour over the weekend. I know that a few of you guys did as well. Sold out event. It was huge. It was fantastic. It was a good time. And I hope they've made a lot of money to do that. And while I was there, I did get a tour of the Camp Cowabunga construction site, which was very cool, and I think is going to be a great addition to the zoo. And then once they get the Kay's Garden done and the elephant exhibit done in a couple of years, I think it's going to be a top-notch place to visit. Thanks.
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to apologize for being tardy. I was at Joust. It is a play put on by Whitson Elementary School, and my daughter was in it. I'll also be tardy next week because of a band concert at the same school at the same time. So anyway, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. At this point in time, we have two individuals that are still here, signed up for public comment. The first individual is J.W. Benning.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As you can see, I'm handicapped, I'm disabled, but I got a problem. I bought a T3 Motion. It's an e-transportation vehicle for handicapped people. And I went down to get a bicycle license to things grow wings in this town. This is made out of steel and plastic, but they grow wings, and I didn't want it stolen. If it was stolen, it had some kind of record who owned it. I paid for it. It's a very expensive machine. It's not something you leave on a street corner. You know, you take and put it in a trailer and lock it up. But I was given a letter by the police department, and they told me that I couldn't drive it on the streets of Topeka, the sidewalks of Topeka, or the trails of Topeka. I think that is wrong. It's an opinion given by a police officer. You know, opinion is not the facts of the law. You know, when you deal with the law, you deal with facts. Facts are people with handicaps, people who are disabled, or be allowed to ride a vehicle where they can move from point A to point B. They gave me a letter, and they called my machine a golf cart. They also wrote, no, I can't operate it in Topeka. I think that's wrong. I need help. I need help from the city of Topeka. I might need help from the American Disabilities. I might need help from ACLU. It's not right. You know, you spend thousands of dollars so you can move. I just left my seat back here, and I had two gentlemen offer to help me to get up and to move around. But that's what those scooters are for. They're made for handicapped people. You people here today were talking about handicapped people. Now you see one. But then when it comes to the handicapped people functioning in this town, nobody. The letter from the police department says I got a golf cart. No, I can't operate it. I didn't buy that vehicle to operate my driveway. I bought it to move from point A to point B. So I need help. I talked to your assistant today, and what she said what she could do for it. But it's a problem that we have here in this town. We have no real assets. You got doors at City Hall you can't open, you gotta push the button. If you don't push the button, it's awful hard to get it open. So it's something that the ADA came in here and got to looking around. Topeka doesn't function for handicapped people. All you people here, I don't see anybody handicapped. Everybody's functionable. I spent 4 years in a wheelchair. Had to learn how to walk again. And then I run into something like this. I spent thousands of dollars getting my scooter. Then I can't use it. It's not made for my driveway. It's designed for a building like this. It's designed to go through halls, through doorways, through elevators.
Sir, your time has run out. Could I ask you as a favor, could you catch up with city manager? We're about to finish the meeting, and he could go ahead and work with you. And he would be the person in charge of taking a look at the ordinances to work with TPD so that you could get some information.
Well, I'll tell you what. That scooter that I got is a transportation vehicle. It's not a golf cart. A golf cart is made for somebody playing golf.
And I understand, sir, and that's why I'm saying that if the city manager is the person, and he's right here, right now, and the nice thing about waiting now till the end is that he could go ahead and take care of you. If you just allow us 4 minutes to hear Mr. McClure, city manager will be right with you. So if you would please don't leave so that we could go ahead and give you one-on-one attention.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for waiting. Mr. McClure.
Henry McClure. The College Hill TIF District is in default about $310,000 due to the shortfall in the TIF bonds, due to lack of revenues, property tax, sales tax. Got to fix that. One of my character defects is sometimes I take things personally. Maybe this is one of them. But one of the reasons there's a shortfall is because there's not a building north of the pizza pub where it was Building J was supposed to be built across from the world famous Jerry's Bike Shop. World famous pizza pub. The developer would technically be in default of the development agreement and the public-private partnership. Title has transferred. I'm not sure that the city, Jerry, and the new developer have all signed an assignment of that, a development agreement, but I'll be making a public records request to ask for that assignment. But I'm telling you, the default doesn't go away on transfer. It's to the heirs and successors. We need to give the current owner of that property the opportunity to clear up the default, and if he can't do it, then put it out to the public. I'm prepared today. I tried to buy it from my old partners and develop on it, and they said, no, we're going to leave it. We're going to sell the property. It's going to add more value to it. I'm telling you, they got the land for free because you're only buying based on the income stream. It would be a bad use of public funds to allow the new owner to put a bark park there. If I had come in with the original TIF district and said, look, part of this whole grand plan is I'm going to build a bark park here, you'd have laughed at it. And I can't fathom that with what you have to do to go through to put the TIF district together, that you could just walk in and all of a sudden, hey, look, I'm going to rezone this thing. You know, there was 501 in the county. Everybody had to give up their increment to get this TIF district through. There was a big process. And I would have to think that in the development agreement, the TIF district would probably be in default if the agreements are not all copacetic. But I'm not here to complain. I'm here just to point out the heads up. We need to fix this. I've got a developer today that's willing to partner up with me, and I want to build on that today. I'm willing to build 8 townhomes or 8 units that would be approved through planning, as opposed to having a bark park. I don't want the bark park there as the owner of the pizza pub. I'm one of the partners. The aroma is not going to help my patio sales. And in the long run, we've got to fix that area. More importantly, I've got a tenant to bring down there for retail sales. It's a company called the Freezing Roll. We have a fully executed lease, or we had a lease out at the mall that we're still working with the mall. We'd like to be in Westridge, but we're willing to go down to College Hill today. And so I got to go ahead and make a proposal to the new owner. So I hope maybe on one hand, he'll say, well, I'm glad you for bringing me an ice cream guy, and sorry you're poo-pooing the bark park. But we got to build on those units today, and if the developer isn't willing to live up to the development agreement and default, we literally have the ability to condemn for public use, because that's part of the old district. But we got to build on that today. We got to make that deficit go away. And I want to fix it. I want to help. 2 deals for you today to help that shortfall evaporate. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. 10 o'clock, the meeting is adjourned.
Yes, it was.